What's good, kiddos, and welcome to the speculation series for Warframe. Pretty much all of my Warframe lore videos have always been in past tense. I always use the updates that have already come out. I research them, I experience them, I write about them, and then I put my videos out for you to enjoy. But something that I tend not to do, except for I guess maybe once with my Duviri Paradox video, is speculate about where the lore of the story is going. That's kind of my preference. I prefer to just experience the story that is given to me because my understanding of how stories are told in live service games sets my expectations. I don't really expect the story to be logically consistent, predictable, or always go in the same direction. I mostly just try to experience the themes and ideas and then work backwards from there. But I wanted to challenge myself to do something a little bit different, so I put out a post on the community posts tab, essentially asking for you guys to tell me what I should speculate on, and challenging myself by promising that I am going to answer literally all of you. So if you can still find that post and go back to it, you could probably get a late entry submitted for this series. I'm going to separate these episodes into thematic chunks, so if anyone has asked a similar question, I'm going to be putting those things together into the same videos. So as you see these ones come out, try to think of something new, because you've already missed the boat. So this time we are starting with Dragonfruit, who says the sentience of Warframes and the moral consequences we may face using them as suits. So by sentience, they're not referring to the sentient faction, they're asking about the sapience, the personhood of the Warframes. Now, this is an interesting thing to ask me about because I kind of feel like we're actually really far past that topic as a discussion point in the story. Through the Second Dream and the Sacrifice quests is where we really explored those two concepts of what happened to the operator, where they were situated ethically in the Orokin society, as well as what resulted or where the Warframes came from and how they were treated in Orokin society. And it was pretty well established in that quest that the reason the Tenno and the Warframes worked so well together was because it was through the transference and the support of the Tenno that the torture, the pain of being a Warframe, the mental anguish of being a Warframe was able to be treated, whether that was through quieting their internal suffering, giving a conversation, or the other flavors that quest cast the relationship of the dualism between the Tenno and the Warframe as being that solution to their suffering. At the time, in my original lore video, I talked about this being a mind-body dualism, a Cartesian dualism of sorts, a unification of two different parts of the psyche, resulting in calm or healing, as in the case of, say, psychoanalytic therapy theories. And since the Sacrifice quest, we've also gotten a lot more information about what the original Warframes were like when they were first transformed. There was a lot of evidence that Warframes were not mindless beasts, but that it was in fact just a parlor trick of Ballas. You know, he made the Warframes silent, he made them have to yell in bestial manners when they performed different behaviors, but they didn't lose their consciousness. Their consciousness was just embraced or negatively impacted by being exposed to the infestation. So to some degree, there were certain Warframes that we know did act intentionally, did act of their own accord. Rhino Prime, Dagoth, Kullervo, Dante, Lavos. All of the lore that we have for a lot of the different Warframes actually suggested that these Warframes maintained their sapience despite the social position they were put in after the transformation. And we get to see a little bit of what that process was like going halfway with the introduction of the proto-frames being semi or slow burn transformations into Warframes. With Temple's Kinopage dialogue, we know that Temple will eventually fully transform, that Flare will eventually fully transform into the Warframe Temple. He's going to hitch a ride on a comet, and that comet is going to show up at the Night of Naga Drums and kind of in my headcanon, kick off, be like the sign for the revolution to begin. Whereas the actual story that is represented in the Kinnan Page dialogue sort of suggests that Temple just is going to join in on the revolution of the Night of Naga Drums by being on that comet that he knows that is going to be there at that night, and just kind of, hop off and join the festivities, get to doing the war. So we know how the original Temple story ends simply because we know that he had a plan to just wait it out and show up at the Night of Naga Drums whenever the time loop of 1999 is finished and allowed to move forward again. Then Temple enters into the timeline that always existed and had always been at the Night of Naga Drums because of eternalism, timey-wimey, whatever. But maybe more on that later. I think what is more interesting to ask is, right now, is that relationship between the operators and the sentience faction. Because we know from the old piece that the Tauron Academy principles, there was in fact already work to unify sentience and the Tenno in terms of how their powers and their energies interact, and there's already an underlying latent potential that wasn't the Oricans doing, but is just how their powers interact, that can be exploited but is very dangerous and unstable. Perhaps we will see expanded lore for Caliban in that update. I'm not so sure about that because Caliban already had a moment in the old piece, and I tried to make Caliban Prime a central part of my experience of the quest that I presented through the video that I think worked out pretty well. But I hope to see more of that because I think there's a lot more ethical questions to ask if the sentience in Tau still have a working society of their own, and somehow still transference is a viable option with the interaction between sentience and Tenno. With the Warframe, the issue of consent kind of gets dropped away because of the extreme and unethical conditions in which both the Warframe and Tenno already found themselves in, and coming to each other for support to resist a common foe. With the sentience, that's probably not going to exist. So any kind of use of transference with the sentience is going to be more like the use of transference with the narrative that was expressed between the Drifter and Arthur in the 1999 quest, where the forced transference between the Drifter and Arthur at the beginning was a serious violation of personal boundaries and trust. It was an immoral thing to do, despite it being expedient to catch up Arthur on all of the things the Drifter knew about the Void War with the Man in the Wall, and how the quest came to an end through the development of actual trust and actual bonds and actual receiving of consent for the relationship between the Drifter and the proto-frames, in the same way that the operator, the Tenno children, and the Warframes were able to achieve through being forced into it. But thank you, Dragonfruit, for your very good question. I think we got a lot out of that, and we're going to move on. Nicholas Gomez asks, what could be the extent of conceptual embodiment relative to the origin system? I mean, not only the Tenno or the Zermin or Duviri, but rather to what extent has the origin system been affected by conceptual embodiment being a thing? Like, how much of it was there before Void shenanigans were set afoot by the Orkin? Alright, so we have two directions that I think we can speculate with this question, which is that first, we either could go all the way back to the beginning and then speculate on what the origins of the Warframe universe actually are. And to that, we don't have very much to go on. Very little information is written or theorized about what that looks like. Pretty much the only text we have about what people in the origin system believed about the origin of the universe is with the Bible text from these, not the Sanctum Anatomica. Yes, there, but La Cathédrale is what I'm trying to think of. The Bible verses that are laid open on the various tables that decorate La Cathédrale have some excerpt that talk about what the world was like in a long past environment, and it's very biblical, it's very metaphorical. The world was filled with light, and then things got dark, and it was bad, and then it was good again after listening to a sage kind of stuff. I did a whole video on what the lore implications of that one text could be, how people were thinking about how people who were following the faith of dualism thought about the world and their own setting, but also recognizing that even in that context, there are clear cultural references to different religions existing prior to dualism, different religions existing alongside dualism. So ultimately, I think there is no settled idea about what the start of the universe is like, and if it is such that the void is the origin of reality itself, that reality just popped up into existence from the void at some point, then to a certain extent, all of the real world, all of the universe, is ultimately determined by conceptual embodiment. What conceptually embodied the universe from nothingness at the beginning? We're basically asking the same questions real religions in the real world have been asking since humans started thinking. So probably not much hope on reaching a satisfying answer for that one in the context of Warframe's story. Now, if we fast forward to the actual time of the game, then there's a couple ideas of how the conceptual embodiment idea might be acting on the universe. Because as far as we're aware, conceptual embodiment only works with void. Void energy takes on a form when exposed to thought and emotion. Channeling void into certain forms in the real universe is what creates all of the wacky powers we get to use with our operator and Warframe. All of the Warframes, I mean. So in a roundabout way, the existence of conceptual embodiment as a law of how the void operates is constantly changing the events of the timeline. But I think there is an even further question to ask, which is the relationship between Wally and his time travel via strands of Kra, strands of time. It's my belief that the explanation that Fibonacci and Lloyd gave during the Whispers in the Wall quest is basically saying that what Wally is doing is that he is changing the frames via eternalism, which is a principle of how the universe works, not a principle of the void. Wally is changing the frames of the universe through the conceptual embodiment of the void, using that power, using that energy wherever his strands of Kra reach, so as to give him more connections and more access to the universe in order to create more changes, to enact more influence, and thereby try to achieve whatever his goal is. We're not exactly sure what that goal is. It doesn't appear to be, say, something as catastrophic as the eradication of all life, though things would get real quiet in the void if the universe stopped existing. The void might be able to go back to being purely void without any thought, emotion, or elements getting in his way. I don't think that's his goal, but it's possible. But I think what Wally's thinking and what his goals are is best left to another question. Thank you so much, Nicholas Gomez. Thank you for watching, everyone. And now my question for you is, can you predict when the next episode of this series comes out?